The first time I saw the number, I thought it was a glitch. My daughter's trust fund wasn't supposed to drop ever. So why did the balance look like someone had been quietly draining it for years? And why was every transfer signed under my ex-husband's authority? Long after our divorce was finalized, relax Eliana Morris had told me once, almost amused, "You don't need to understand everything." But now I was standing outside the courthouse holding a printed bank statement with highlighted withdrawals and a company name I recognized too well, Reed Strategic Consulting, his company. And the clerk had just said the judge requested every single transaction. If you're watching from somewhere else, tell me where you're from and what time it is there. I'm curious how far this story reaches. And if you've ever trusted someone with your child's future, you might want to stay for this. I didn't go looking for a problem. That's the part I keep coming back to, how ordinary it all felt in the beginning. It was a Tuesday night, nothing special. Lily was at the kitchen table working through her math homework, chewing on the end of her pencil the way she always did when she got stuck. I was in my home office going through end-of-year documents, tax prep, expense summaries, the usual quiet administrative things that fill your evenings when life has finally settled into something predictable. The trust fund statement was just one file among many. I almost didn't open it. Lily's trust had been set up when she was 2. Marcus had insisted on it back then, said it would protect her future no matter what happened between us. At the time, I believed that meant something. Even after the divorce, I told myself at least that part of him hadn't changed. So I clicked on the PDF without thinking much of it. The number at the top didn't make sense. I frowned, leaned closer to the screen, then refreshed the file like that might somehow correct it. The balance was lower than I remembered, not dramatically at first glance, but enough to feel off, like a room where the furniture had been shifted just a few inches. I scrolled. There were management fees. That wasn't unusual. Some administrative costs. Fine. But then there were transfers, small ones at first. Rounded amounts that didn't quite follow a pattern I could immediately recognize. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, spread out over months. I told myself it was normal. Investment adjustments. Reallocations. That was the language Marcus always used. He handled the financial side of things when we were married. I handled everything else. It had worked in its own way, but something about those numbers didn't sit right. Mom Lily's voice pulled me back. I turned, forcing a smile. "Yeah, baby, does this look right?" She held up her worksheet, brow furrowed. "Fractions." I walked over, sat beside her, and helped her work through it step by step. Half plus 3/4. Find a common denominator. Simple. I explained it calmly, patiently, the way I always tried to. But in the back of my mind, I was still thinking about the numbers on that screen. After she went to bed, I went back to the office. This time I opened the previous year's statement, then the one before that. That's when the pattern started to show. The balance didn't just dip, it fluctuated in a way that didn't match any steady investment strategy I knew. Gains, then sudden drops. Recoveries, then another series of withdrawals. And in between, transfers labeled in vague terms: allocation adjustment, external distribution, temporary movement. Temporary. I sat back in my chair, staring at that word longer than I should have. Temporary didn't mean gone, but it didn't mean safe either. I checked for quarterly reports. There should have been 4 per year. There were only 3. I went back another year. Again, 1 missing. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with something slower, heavier. The kind of feeling that doesn't spike, it settles. I reached for my phone and scrolled to Marcus's name. We didn't talk much anymore. Our communication was efficient, polite, mostly centered around Lily's schedule. Pickups, school events, medical appointments. We had learned how to coexist without reopening old wounds. At least that's what I thought. I called him. He picked up on the third ring. Eliana, he said, like I had interrupted something mildly important. Everything okay? I'm reviewing Lily's trust statements, I said, keeping my voice even. There are some transfers I don't recognize. A pause. Not long, but noticeable. Yeah, he said finally. That's normal. Normal how investment movement, he replied. You shift funds to get better returns. It's standard. I don't see corresponding gains, I said, and some quarterly reports are missing. Another pause. This one shorter. You're looking at it too literally, he said, his tone softening just slightly. These things don't always show up cleanly on statements. There's lag, timing differences. I'd like full access to the account, I said. That's when his voice changed. Not aggressive, not defensive, just firm. I'm the primary trustee, Eliana. That hasn't changed. I know, I said. But I'm her mother. And you're not being excluded, he replied quickly. You're just overcomplicating something that's already handled. Handled. The word landed harder than I expected. I'm asking for the login, I said. It's not about the login, he said. It's about structure. There are tax implications, reporting responsibilities, Marcus. I rarely cut him off. But I did then. I want to see where the money is. Silence. For a moment, I thought he might actually answer the question directly. Instead, he exhaled softly. I'll send you a summary. That's not what I asked for. It's what you need, he said. Trust me. There it was. Trust me. I looked back at the screen, at the numbers that didn't line up, at the missing reports, at the word temporary repeated just enough times to feel intentional. I used to, I said quietly. He didn't respond. I'll wait for the summary, I added, ending the call before he could say anything else. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the account page. Then I tried to log in. I still had the old credentials saved. The system rejected them immediately. Password incorrect. I reset it. A verification message popped up, but not to my phone, to his. Access restricted, primary trustee authorization required. I leaned back slowly, letting that sink in. The change hadn't been recent. The system log showed the update date clearly. 3 days after our divorce was finalized. Not during, not before, after. Which meant he had waited. Waited until everything was signed. Everything was settled. Everything looked clean on paper. Then he closed the door. I opened my email and searched his name. Hundreds of threads came up, but I narrowed it down by keyword trust. There it was, an email from 2 years ago. Subject account structure adjustment. I clicked it open. Marcus had written it late at night. I could tell by the timestamp. His tone was calm, almost reassuring. Given the tax exposure and long-term growth strategy, it makes sense for me to remain the sole acting trustee. It'll simplify reporting and protect the fund from unnecessary complications. At the time, I had replied with one sentence. Okay, if that's best for Lily. I stared at my own words now, feeling something shift inside me. Not regret exactly, but clarity. He hadn't hidden anything. He had just explained it in a way I didn't question. I went back to the statement, scrolled down to the transaction list again, and this time I didn't just look at the numbers. I looked at the dates. One of them caught my eye. A transfer labeled external distribution. The date matched something else I remembered. The month Marcus had told me his business was going through a rough quarter. At the time, I had believed him. Now, I wasn't so sure what exactly I had believed. I copied the transaction ID into my notes. Then another, then another. If Marcus was right, there would be a pattern that made sense. If he wasn't, there would be a different kind of pattern, and I had a feeling I was about to find out which one it was. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was panicking. That would have been easier to manage. Panic is loud, obvious, you deal with it or it burns itself out. What I felt was quieter, more precise, like something in my brain had shifted into a different mode and wasn't going to let go until it understood what it was looking at. By morning, I had a list: transaction IDs, dates, notes I had pulled from old emails. It wasn't proof of anything yet, but it was enough to ask better questions. I took Lily to school, waited until she disappeared through the front doors, then drove straight to the bank. The branch was one of those newer ones, glass walls, open layout, everything designed to feel transparent. It didn't make the conversation easier. "I'd like to review the full transaction history on a trust account," I told the receptionist. She smiled politely. "Do you have authorization as trustee?" "I'm the beneficiary's mother," I said. "The trustee is my ex-husband. I have reason to believe the account's been mismanaged." That word got a different kind of reaction. She didn't argue, just nodded and led me to a small office in the back where a man in his 40s introduced himself as Daniel Brooks, a senior advisor. "Ms. Morris," he said, shaking my hand. "I understand you have concerns about a trust account." "I do," I said, sitting across from him. "I'm not asking for anything outside policy. I just need to understand what's happening with the funds." He listened carefully while I explained. I kept it simple: missing reports, irregular transfers, restricted access. When I finished, he folded his hands together and paused for a moment before speaking. "Let me start by saying this," he said. "If you're not listed as a trustee or authorized party, there are limits to what I can show you directly." I expected that. But he continued, "I can confirm general activity patterns and account structure details without violating policy." That was enough. "Has money been moved out of the trust?" I asked. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Regularly?" He nodded once. "There have been multiple external transfers over the past several years." I felt something settle in my chest, not relief but validation. I wasn't imagining it. "Were those transfers part of a standard investment strategy?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his monitor slightly as if considering how much he could say. Without getting into specifics, he said slowly, "This account doesn't follow the typical structure we see for child-focused trusts." "In what way?" "There's a higher level of external movement than usual," he said, "and the destination accounts are unconventional for this type of fund." "Unconventional how?" He looked at me directly now. "They're not institutional investment accounts." I let that sit for a second. "Where are they going?" I asked. He hesitated just enough to make it clear he was stepping carefully. "I can't give you full account numbers or balances," he said, "but I can confirm that several transfers were directed to a business account." My fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the desk. "Whose business?" Another pause. "An entity registered under the name Reed Strategic Consulting." The same name I had seen outside the courthouse. The same name Marcus had mentioned casually once or twice, usually when he was talking about expanding operations or new clients. At the time, it had sounded like progress. Now it sounded like something else entirely. "That's his company," I said. Daniel didn't confirm it directly. He didn't need to. I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice steady. "Is there any indication those funds were returned to the trust?" "There have been some incoming transfers as well," he said, "but not consistently aligned with the outgoing amounts." Not consistently aligned, meaning not fully returned. "Do you see any documentation attached to those transfers?" I asked. "Loan agreements, investment notes, anything that explains the purpose?" "Not in the standard fields," he said. "If documentation exists, it would likely be maintained outside the account interface. Of course it would. Marcus had always been meticulous about that kind of thing, keeping just enough separation between actions and explanations to make everything look clean on the surface. I leaned back slightly, processing. So from your perspective, I said, choosing my words carefully, this isn't a typical passive investment structure. No, Daniel said. It's more active, more discretionary. That's one way to put it. He gave a small, neutral smile. Discretion can be appropriate in some trust arrangements. It depends on the terms. I'm starting to think it depends on the person, I said. That time he didn't respond. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he spoke again, quieter now. If you believe there's been misuse of funds, he said, there is a formal process to request a full audit. Through the bank, through the court, he said. A judge can compel disclosure of all related accounts, not just the trust itself. All related accounts, meaning Marcus's business, meaning anything connected to it. I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He studied me for a second, like he was trying to decide how much more to say. Off the record, he added, lowering his voice slightly, cases like this often come down to intent. Intent, I repeated. Whether the trustee acted in the beneficiary's best interest, he said. Even if the funds were moved, the question is why and whether those actions can be justified under the trust's terms. I almost smiled at that, because I already knew what Marcus would say. He'd say it was temporary, strategic, necessary. He'd say it was all for Lily. But the numbers I had seen didn't look like a plan. They looked like something else. Thank you, I said, standing up. You've been very helpful. He nodded. If you decide to move forward legally, your attorney can request everything, and at that point there won't be any gaps. No gaps. That was exactly what I needed. I walked out of the bank into the late morning light, my mind already shifting into the next step. This wasn't about guessing anymore. It was about proving. I got into my car, pulled out my phone, and opened my notes again. The transaction IDs were still there. The dates. The patterns I had started to map. And now, one more piece. Reed Strategic Consulting. I typed it into the search bar. The company profile came up almost immediately. Registered owner Marcus Reed. Business category Financial Consulting and Strategic Services. I scrolled further. There was a secondary listing, another associated account tied to the business. The name attached to it made me pause. Stephanie Reed, his sister. I stared at the screen, something cold and focused settling in. This wasn't just Marcus moving money around. This was a system. And systems don't build themselves overnight. They're planned, maintained, protected. I locked my phone and leaned back in my seat, staring out at the parking lot. For the first time since I opened that statement, I wasn't wondering if something was wrong. I knew it was. The question now was how deep it went, and more importantly, how much of it he thought I'd never look at. I didn't call Marcus again after the bank, not because I was afraid of what he'd say, but because I already knew the shape of it. He'd stay calm. He'd use words like strategy and timing. He'd make it sound like I was overreacting to something I didn't fully understand. And for a long time that approach had worked. Just not anymore. Rachel Nguyen's office was on the 12th floor of a building downtown that overlooked the river. Clean lines, quiet reception area. Nothing flashy, but the kind of place where things were handled precisely. I had found her through a referral. Someone who didn't dramatize, didn't overpromise. Just someone who knew how to read the fine print. When she walked in, she didn't waste time. Eliana Morris, she asked, extending her hand. Yes, come on back. Her office was lined with shelves, case files, legal texts neatly arranged. She gestured for me to sit, then took the chair across from me, a notepad already in front of her. Start from the beginning, she said. So I did. Not every detail, just the important ones: the trust, the divorce, Marcus's role as sole trustee, the missing reports, the restricted access, the bank confirmation that funds had been moving into his business. Rachel didn't interrupt. She only asked questions when something needed clarification. How old is your daughter? 10. Was the trust established during the marriage? Yes. Any amendments after the divorce? Not that I signed. She nodded, jotting something down. When I finished, she leaned back slightly, folding her hands. Okay, she said. Let's break this down. There was something about the way she said it, calm, structured, that made everything feel less overwhelming. First, she continued, your ex-husband, Marcus Reed, is acting as the sole trustee. That means he has a fiduciary duty to manage the trust in your daughter's best interest. I understand that part, I said. What I don't understand is how far that discretion goes. Far enough to make investment decisions, she said. Not far enough to treat the trust like a personal line of credit. That landed cleanly. So moving money into his business isn't automatically illegal, she said, cutting in gently, but it raises serious concerns, especially if there's no clear documentation, no formal loan agreement, and no consistent return of funds. I nodded. That matched what Daniel at the bank had implied. What about the missing reports? I asked. That's more straightforward, she said. Most trust agreements require annual or quarterly reporting. If he failed to provide those, that's a potential breach of duty on its own. She reached for a folder I had brought and opened it, scanning the printed statements I'd highlighted. These transfers, she said, tapping one of the pages. They're labeled broadly: external distribution, allocation adjustment. That kind of language gives him some cover, but it's not specific enough to stand on its own if challenged. So what do we need? I asked. Clarity, she said. Full transaction history, documentation tied to each movement, and a timeline that shows intent. Intent, I repeated. She nodded. That's what this will hinge on. Not just what he did, but why. If he can show that every decision was made in good faith for your daughter's long-term benefit, it becomes harder to argue misuse. And if he can't, then the court starts asking different questions, she said, like whether he used those funds to support his own financial interests. I thought about the business account, the irregular returns, the missing reports. I think he did, I said quietly. Rachel studied me for a moment. Believing that is one thing, proving it is another. I have some patterns, I said, pulling out my notebook. Dates that line up with his business downturns. Transfers that match those periods. She took the notebook, scanning the entries. This is a good start, she said, but patterns alone won't be enough. We need documentation that connects those dots directly. Like what? Bank records from the receiving accounts, she said. Business financials. Anything that shows where the money went after it left the trust and whether it came back. I hesitated for a second. There's another account, I said. His sister, Stephanie Reed. Her name showed up linked to the business. Rachel's expression shifted slightly, not surprised, but attentive. Family involvement complicates things, she said. But it can also make patterns easier to trace. People tend to reuse the same channels. So what's the next step? She closed the folder and set it aside. We file a motion, she said, petition the court for full financial disclosure. Not just the trust account, but any related accounts connected to Marcus's management of those funds. All related accounts, I said. Yes. His business. If we can establish a reasonable connection, yes. And his sister. If her account received trust funds directly or indirectly, then absolutely. I felt something steady settle into place. This wasn't guesswork anymore. It was a process. What will he do? I asked. Rachel gave a small, almost knowing smile. He'll respond, she said, through his attorney. He'll frame everything as strategic. Temporary reallocations, growth-based decisions. He'll say it was for Lily, I said. He will, she agreed. And that's where it gets interesting. How so? Because intent cuts both ways, she said. If he truly believed he was acting in her best interest, he'll lean on that. But if the records show he prioritized his own financial stability over preserving the trust, then that argument weakens. I thought about the timing of those transfers. The months Marcus had told me things were tight. The way he had brushed off my questions. Do we have enough to start? I asked. Rachel didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for a document on her desk and slid it toward me. Take a look at this, she said. It was a copy of the trust agreement. I had seen it before, but not like this. She had highlighted a section near the middle. Temporary reallocation for investment purposes, I read aloud. That's the clause he'll rely on, she said. It gives him flexibility, but it also implies something important. What? That the funds remain tied to the trust's purpose, she said, not diverted for unrelated use. I looked up at her. So if he used it to cover business losses, that's not investment, she said. That's substitution. He's replacing the trust's stability with his own risk, and risk I knew was exactly what Marcus had been dealing with. So we show that, I said. We prove it, she corrected gently. There was a difference. I nodded. Okay, I said. Let's do it. She reached for her pen again, already moving into the next step. I'll draft the motion today, she said. Once it's filed, the court can order full disclosure. At that point, he won't be able to pick and choose what you see. No more summaries, no more filtered explanations. Just numbers. Clear. Complete. Accountable. As I stood to leave, Rachel added one more thing. Eliana, she said. I turned back. Be prepared, she continued. This won't just be about money. Once everything's on record, it changes the dynamic between you. I thought about Lily, about the way she trusted both of us without question. I'm not trying to destroy him, I said. I know, Rachel replied, but you are about to remove his control, and people don't always respond well to that. I understood that, more than she probably realized. I left her office with a copy of the motion draft in my hand and a clearer sense of what came next. This wasn't about confronting Marcus directly, not yet. This was about letting the system do what it was designed to do, expose everything. And once it did, there wouldn't be anywhere left for him to hide. The first night I sat down to map everything out, I didn't tell myself I was building a case. I told myself I just needed clarity. That made it easier to start. I cleared the dining table after Lily went to bed and spread everything out, printed statements, old emails, tax documents, even a few notebooks I hadn't opened in years. It looked excessive at first, like I was overreacting to something that might still have a simple explanation. But the moment I started lining things up by date, that feeling disappeared. Patterns don't argue with you. They just exist. I began with the statements I had, what little Marcus hadn't filtered or delayed. I wrote down every transfer out of the trust account, date, amount, description. Then I matched those dates to anything I could find in our old communication. It didn't take long before the first connection showed up. An email from Marcus sent late at night. Cash flow's tight this quarter, just temporary. I've got a few deals closing soon. The date of that email matched a $12,000 withdrawal from the trust. I circled both. Then I moved to the next. Another withdrawal, $8,500. Same month, another email. Client delayed payment again. I'm covering overhead out of pocket right now, except he hadn't been covering it out of pocket. He'd been pulling from Lily's trust. I sat back, pressing my fingers lightly against my temple. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I needed to stay focused. It would have been easy to let anger take over at that point. Easy to stop looking at it like data and start looking at it like betrayal. But if I did that too early, I'd miss something. So I kept going. Each transfer told a piece of the same story. When his business slowed down, money moved out of the trust. When things picked up again, some of it came back, but never all. The amounts didn't match. The timing didn't balance. It wasn't a cycle of investment, it was a cycle of dependency. I wrote that phrase down without thinking. Then I circled it. Dependency. Not on Lily's future, but on her money. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of it. Marcus. I stared at his name for a moment before answering. Eliana, he said, his tone neutral. I sent you a summary. I saw it. The email had come in earlier that evening. A neatly formatted document, charts percentages, projected returns. It looked clean, professional, like something designed to reassure, not explain. You didn't respond, he added. I'm still reviewing it. You don't need to go line by line, he said. That's why I put it together. It gives you the big picture. I'm not interested in the big picture, I said. I'm interested in the details. A pause. That's what I'm giving you, he said. No, I replied calmly. You're giving me a version of it. His exhale came through the phone, slow and controlled. Eliana, I know this looks unfamiliar to you, but this is how active portfolio management works. You move funds where they can grow. Into your business, I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. It's not that simple, he said. It's exactly that simple, I said. The account name is on the transfer records. That doesn't mean what you think it means. Then explain it. Silence. For a second, I thought he might actually try. Instead, his tone shifted subtly, but enough for me to recognize it. You're creating a problem where there isn't one, he said. The money isn't gone. It's being used. For what I asked. For growth, he said. For stability. For long-term return. For your business, I said. For our daughter, he corrected. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. You don't get to say that like it's the same thing. It is, he insisted. Everything I'm doing is to make sure she has more, not less. Then why doesn't the balance reflect that, I asked? He didn't answer. I looked down at my notes, the dates, the amounts, the gaps. You said it was temporary, I continued. Temporary means it goes back. All of it. It will, he said quickly, when another pause. Before she needs it. That was the first honest thing he'd said. Not because it made sense, but because it revealed the assumption underneath everything. That he had time. That he could use it now and fix it later. That no one would look closely enough to question the gap in between. I'm not waiting for that, I said. What does that mean? It means I'm done relying on summaries, I replied. If everything's as clean as you say, you won't have a problem showing the full records. His voice cooled instantly. You're talking about legal action. I'm talking about transparency. They're the same thing, he said. Not to me. They will be, he replied. There it was. Not a threat. Not exactly. But a line being drawn. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let the silence sit between us for a few seconds longer than usual. Then I said, "Good night, Marcus," and ended the call. I set the phone down and looked back at the table, at the pattern, at the word I had circled. Dependency. And then something else caught my eye. A transfer I hadn't fully examined yet. Larger than the others. $25,000. The label was different. Not allocation adjustment. Not external distribution. This one read loan repayment. I frowned, flipping through the surrounding documents. There was no record of any loan issued from the trust. No agreement. No note. No entry explaining who had borrowed what or why. Just the repayment. Which meant one of two things. Either the loan had been created off record, or it had never existed in the first place. I reached for my laptop and pulled up the business filings for Reed Strategic Consulting again. This time I looked deeper. Not just the main account, the associated entities. That's when I saw it. A secondary account tied to the business. Different bank, different structure. But one familiar name attached as an authorized user. Stephanie Reed. I stared at it for a long moment, letting the implications settle. Marcus hadn't just moved money. I had moved it through layers, through people, through accounts that made the trail harder to follow unless you knew exactly where to look. I leaned back slowly, the room quiet around me. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't even just a bad decision. It was a system, built carefully, maintained over time. And for the first time since this started, I stopped asking whether he thought he could fix it later. I started asking something else. How long had he believed no one would ever check I didn't call Stephanie right away? Not because I wasn't ready, but because I didn't want to walk into that conversation unprepared. People say more when they think they're filling in small gaps, not when they feel like they're being confronted with something complete. So I waited a day, long enough to go back through the filings again, long enough to trace the connections between Marcus's business account and the secondary account Stephanie was tied to, long enough to confirm that this wasn't a one-time overlap, it was recurring. When I finally texted her, I kept it simple. Hey, I'm reviewing some financial records related to Lily's trust. I saw your name connected to one of the accounts. Can we talk? She didn't respond immediately, but she didn't ignore it either. Coffee tomorrow, she replied an hour later. Late morning. That told me enough. If she were completely unaware, she would have asked questions first. If she were completely confident, she might have declined. This was somewhere in between. The cafe she picked was quiet, tucked into a corner of a shopping center that didn't get much weekday traffic. Neutral ground, public but not crowded. Stephanie was already there when I walked in. She looked the same as always, put together, composed, the kind of person who knew how to carry herself in any room. Marcus had always said she was good with details. At the time I thought he meant paperwork. Now I wasn't so sure. Eliana, she said, standing as I approached. It's been a while. It has. I agreed, sitting across from her. We exchanged a few surface-level updates, Lily's schoolwork, the usual. It felt almost normal. Almost. Then I placed my phone on the table and slid it toward her. The screen showed the business registration page, Reed Strategic Consulting, with her name listed as an authorized user on the secondary account. Her expression didn't change right away, but I saw it in the slight pause before she spoke. Okay, she said carefully. What exactly are you asking? I'm asking how Lily's trust money ended up moving through accounts connected to you. She leaned back slightly, folding her arms, not defensive but guarded. I don't handle the trust, Marcus does. I know that, I replied. That's not what I asked. Another pause. She glanced down at the phone again, then back at me. I help him with administrative stuff, she said. Paperwork, transfers. It's not unusual. Not unusual for what I asked. For managing funds, she said. Moving things where they need to go. From a child's trust into a private business. Her jaw tightened slightly. It wasn't like that, she said. Then tell me what it was like. She hesitated. Not because she didn't know, but because she was deciding how much to say. It was temporary, she said finally. Marcus had some cash flow issues. Short term. He needed flexibility, so he used Lily's money. He borrowed it, she corrected quickly. There's a difference. Is there? I asked. Yes, she said more firmly now. Because he intended to put it back, and he has some of it. Not all of it. She didn't respond to that. Instead, she reached for her coffee, taking a sip that felt more like a pause than anything else. He was trying to stabilize things, she continued. If his business failed, that would have affected Lily too. This way he could keep everything running and then restore the trust once things improved. I listened without interrupting, because what she was describing made sense on a certain level. Not legally, but emotionally, strategically. It was the kind of reasoning people use when they convince themselves they're doing the right thing under pressure. "And you were okay with that?" I asked. "I trusted him," she said. "He's my brother. And this account," I gestured toward the phone. "Your name is on it. That's more than paperwork." She exhaled, setting the cup down. "I needed someone else listed," she said, "for access, for flexibility. I didn't think it was a big deal. It becomes a big deal when money moves through it." "I didn't take anything," she said quickly. "If that's what you're implying, I'm not implying anything," I said. "I'm asking how it worked." Her shoulders dropped slightly, some of the tension easing as she realized I wasn't attacking her directly. "Funds would move from the trust into the business account," she said slowly. "Then sometime through the secondary account mine, depending on how things were structured. It was easier for certain transactions, easier how different banks, different processing timelines. It avoided delays. I nodded once, filing that away, and when the money came back, I asked. "It went back into the trust," she said. Mostly. She winced slightly at the word. "Look," she said, leaning forward now. "This wasn't some scheme. He wasn't trying to steal from Lily. He was trying to keep everything afloat so he could give her more in the long run." "I believe that's what he told himself," I said. Her expression shifted. "That's not fair." "Neither is using her trust as a buffer," I replied. Silence settled between us for a moment. Not hostile, just heavy. "I didn't think it would turn into this," she said quietly. "That's usually how these things start." She looked down at her hands, then back up at me. "He was under a lot of pressure," she added. "You know how he gets when things start slipping." I did. Marcus didn't panic outwardly. He adjusted, controlled, reframed, until the situation bent to match his version of it. "And he said he'd fix it," she continued, "before Lily needed it, before anyone noticed." There it was, the assumption again. Time, control, no scrutiny. I leaned back slightly, studying her. "Stephanie," I said, keeping my tone even, "did he ever document any of this loan agreement's internal records? Anything that shows this was structured, not just improvised?" She hesitated again. "That was my answer. There were notes," she said eventually. "Internal ones, but not formal. Not like what you're thinking. Not like what a court would expect." She didn't respond. I reached for my phone and pulled it back toward me. "I'm filing for full disclosure," I said. Her head snapped up slightly. "Eliana, I'm not asking for your permission," I added calmly. "I'm letting you know what's happening next." She sat back, processing that. "You think this is going to stay contained?" she asked. "Once it goes to court, everything comes out. His business, your history, all of it." "I'm aware." "And Lily," she pressed. "You want her caught in the middle of that?" I held her gaze. "I want her money protected." Another silence. Longer this time. Then she exhaled slowly, the resistance in her posture softening just a fraction. "He really thought he could fix it before it got to this point," she said. "I know," I replied. "And if he had?" "He didn't," I said. That ended it. She nodded once, almost to herself. "Then I guess we'll see what happens," she said. "We will." I stood up, leaving a few bills on the table for the coffee. As I turned to go, she spoke again. "Eliana." I paused. "He never saw this as taking from her," she said. "He saw it as borrowing from time." I let that sit for a second. Then I said time doesn't belong to him either and walked out. Outside, the air felt sharper than it had when I walked in. Not colder, just clearer. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Stephanie hadn't given me documents. She hadn't confirmed amounts. But she had given me something else. Language. Borrowing. Temporary. Rolling funds. Those weren't legal terms. They were justifications. And justifications don't hold up when the numbers start speaking for themselves. I started the engine, my mind already moving to the next step. Because now it wasn't just about showing that money had moved, it was about showing why. And once that became clear, so would everything else. Filing the motion didn't feel dramatic. There was no moment of hesitation, no last-minute doubt. It was just paperwork, structured, precise, deliberate. Rachel had everything prepared by the time I walked into her office that Friday morning. She slid the document across the table, already tabbed and organized. "Read it once," she said. "Make sure everything reflects what you want." I did. It wasn't emotional. It didn't mention betrayal or trust or anything personal. It simply stated facts, dates, discrepancies, missing reports, and a request for full financial disclosure across all accounts connected to Marcus Reed's management of the trust. That was the shift. This wasn't about what I felt anymore. It was about what could be proven. "I'm good with this," I said, handing it back. Rachel nodded. "Once we file, his attorney will respond. Expect pushback." "I do. And expect him to reframe everything," she added. "He'll present this as a misunderstanding, not misconduct." "That sounds like him." She gave a small, knowing smile, then stood. "Let's get it on record." The courthouse filing office was quieter than I expected. A few people in line, a steady rhythm of documents being stamped and processed. No one looked like they were in the middle of something life-changing, but I knew better. The clerk took the motion without comment, reviewed it briefly, then stamped it with a date and time. That was it. There was no announcement, no sense of finality, just a small mark on paper that meant everything from that point forward would be official. "Now we wait," Rachel said as we stepped outside. How long? A few days for his attorney to respond. Maybe a week for the court to review and issue an order. And if they grant it, then we get everything she said. Full account histories, linked entities, supporting documentation. No summaries, no filters, no carefully worded explanations. Just records. That night, Marcus called again. I let it ring twice before answering. "Eliana," he said, his voice tighter than usual. "I just got something from your attorney. I assumed you would. You filed a motion for financial disclosure," he asked, like he needed to hear me confirm it. "Yes." A short, sharp exhale came through the line. "This is unnecessary," he said. "You could have just talked to me." "I did." "That's not the same as this," he replied. "You're escalating something that doesn't need to be escalated. I'm clarifying something that hasn't been explained. I sent you a full summary. You sent me your version of events," I said. "The court can request the actual ones." Silence. Then quieter, more controlled. "You're turning this into a legal issue. It already is one." "No," he said. "It's a trust management issue. There's a difference. Not when the trust belongs to our daughter." His tone hardened slightly. "You think a judge is going to see this the way you do?" he asked. "That they're going to look at strategic fund movement and call it misuse? I think a judge will look at the records," I said. "And what if the records show I was right?" he pressed. "What if they show I grew the fund, that I made decisions in her best interest? Then that's what they'll show." Another pause. "And if they don't?" he asked. I didn't answer that. "I didn't need to. You're risking a lot here," he said, "for something you don't fully understand." "I understand enough." "Do you?" he said. Because once this goes through the system, it doesn't just stop at the trust. They'll look at everything, my business, my accounts, yours too. I'm aware. And Lily, he added, you want her name tied to a case like this? My goal is to make sure her name is tied to something that's protected, I said. He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. I was going to fix this, he said. That caught my attention not because it was new, but because of how he said it. Past tense. You still can, I replied. With the records. That's not what I mean. I know. Silence settled between us again. Then he said something I hadn't expected. You don't understand what it took to keep everything running, he said. There were months where if I didn't make certain moves, the whole business would have collapsed. And you decided her trust was the place to pull from. I decided it was temporary, he corrected. And that I could put it back before it mattered. Before it mattered to who I asked. He didn't answer, because we both knew the answer. Before it mattered to anyone who would question it. This isn't about your business surviving, I said. It's about boundaries. You think I crossed a line. I know you did. He let out a slow breath. You're not going to drop this, he said. No. Another pause. Then almost quietly, all right, he said. Then we do it your way. That was the first time he sounded like he understood what was coming. Not agreed with it. Understood it. The next few days were quiet. No calls, no messages, just waiting. Rachel checked in once, confirming that Marcus's attorney had filed a response. As expected, it framed everything as strategic management, temporary reallocations, growth-focused decisions, no intent to harm the trust. He's leaning heavily on intent, she said. I figured. But there's something else, she added. They submitted partial statements. Partial, yes. Selected months, specific transactions, enough to support their narrative. I wasn't surprised. That won't hold up, I said. No, she agreed. Not if the judge orders full disclosure. When will we know? Soon, she said. The court doesn't like gaps. That part stayed with me. Gaps. That's what this had been from the beginning. Missing reports, missing explanations, missing pieces that only made sense when you stepped back and looked at the whole picture. 2 days later, Rachel called. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something sharper. The judge reviewed both filings, she said, and the response. And she's issuing an order. I waited. For full financial disclosure, Rachel continued. All accounts connected to the trust. No exceptions. I closed my eyes briefly, letting that settle in. That includes his business, I said. Yes. And Stephanie's account. If it received funds tied to the trust, yes. No more gaps, no more selective timelines. Everything. When I asked. Immediately she said, they've been given a deadline to produce the records. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Okay. Eliana, she added, once those records come in, we'll know exactly what we're dealing with. I looked out the window, my reflection faint in the glass. I think I already do, I said. Maybe she replied. But this time, it won't be a theory. No, it wouldn't. It would be numbers, dates, transactions that either aligned or didn't. And once they were all in one place, there wouldn't be any room left for interpretation. Just the truth. The records didn't arrive all at once. They came in batches. Secure files, indexed folders, spreadsheets, layered with more detail than anything Marcus had ever sent me. Rachel forwarded the first set late in the afternoon with a short message. Start with this. We'll review together tomorrow. I didn't wait until tomorrow. I opened everything that night. At first, it looked overwhelming. Thousands of lines of transactions across multiple accounts. Trust business secondary accounts, cross-referenced dates. But once I started filtering by time and amount, the structure began to reveal itself. Not chaos, design. I printed out the key sections and spread them across the table again, just like before. Only this time, I wasn't guessing anymore. Every transfer out of the trust had a matching entry somewhere else. Every temporary movement had a destination, and those destinations formed a pattern. The first layer was exactly what Daniel Brooks had hinted at: trust. Read strategic consulting. That part was clear. But then the money didn't stay there. It moved again. Read strategic consulting, secondary account, Stephanie's account. Then sometimes, only sometimes, it came back. Secondary account, trust. But never in full. Never in the same amount. I circled one sequence following it step by step. $15,000 withdrawn from the trust. Transferred into the business account. 2 days later, $10,000 moved into Stephanie's account. A week after that, $6,000 returned to the trust. I stared at those numbers. 15 out, 6 back, 9 unaccounted for in that cycle alone. I checked the next one. Same pattern, different amounts. Then another, and another. By midnight, I wasn't looking for patterns anymore. I was documenting them. I built a timeline, clean, linear, undeniable. Each entry showed movement delay, partial return, and alongside it, I added context. Emails, business filings, dates. Marcus had mentioned things being tight. Everything aligned. The next morning, I brought it all to Rachel's office. She didn't react right away when I laid everything out. She just looked carefully, methodically, moving from one page to the next. Then she nodded once. "This is consistent," she said. "Too consistent," I replied. She pulled one of the statements closer. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a column I hadn't focused on as much. Transaction descriptions. They weren't random. They were categorized. Internal transfer, external distribution, loan repayment. "Do you see what he's doing here?" she asked. "He's labeling it differently depending on the movement," I said. "Exactly," she replied. "He's creating the appearance of structure without formal documentation. So it looks intentional," I said. "It looks justifiable," she corrected. There was a difference. I leaned back, folding my arms. "Is it enough?" I asked. "To show movement," she said. "Yes." "To show misuse?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for another folder, one I hadn't opened yet. "This is from the business account," she said. I opened it, scanning the entries. Expenses, payroll, vendor payments, and then a large outgoing transfer. 40,000, labeled debt settlement. I frowned. "That's not connected to the trust," I said. "Look at the date," she replied. I did. 3 days after a $50,000 withdrawal from the trust. My chest tightened slightly, not with shock, but with something more solid. Confirmation. He used it to pay off personal debt, I said. Not just personal, Rachel added. Business liability tied directly to him. I followed the trail. Trust. Business. Debt payment. No return. No partial repayment. Just gone. "That's not investment," I said quietly. "No," she agreed. "That's self-benefiting use." The phrase landed differently this time. Not theoretical. Not implied. Proven. I sat there for a moment, letting it settle. Because this was the shift. Up until now, Marcus could argue intent. He could say he was managing funds, moving things around, planning to restore everything. But this was different. This was money leaving the trust and never coming back. Used to solve a problem that had nothing to do with Lily's future. Rachel closed the folder. "This changes the framing," she said. "How?" Now, it's not just about whether he intended to return the funds, she explained. It's about whether he used them in a way that directly benefited himself at the expense of the trust. And he did. Yes, she said. And we can show it. I exhaled slowly, feeling something shift inside me again. Not anger, not even satisfaction, just clarity. What happens next? I asked. We present this, she said, along with the full timeline. The court will review everything but this. She tapped the debt payment record. This is the kind of detail that cuts through arguments. Because it's simple. Because it's undeniable. I nodded. There was nothing Marcus could say to reframe that. No language that would turn it into strategy. No explanation that would make it about Lily. I gathered the papers, stacking them neatly. As I did, something else caught my eye. Another transfer, smaller, $7, $500, also labeled repayment. But this one was different. The funds came back into the trust, but not from the business account. From Stephanie's. I pointed to it. What about this? I asked. Rachel leaned in, examining the entry. That's interesting, she said. Why? Because it suggests he was using her account to balance things, she replied. Moving money around to create the appearance of repayment. So the trail looks cleaner than it is. Exactly! I sat back again, the full picture settling into place. This wasn't just movement. It was layering. Shifting funds between accounts to blur the lines between withdrawal and return, to make it harder to trace. To make it easier to explain if anyone ever asked. I looked at Rachel. He thought this would hold up, I said. She gave a small, measured nod. He thought it would never be fully examined, she said. That was the difference. Marcus hadn't built this to survive scrutiny. He'd built it to avoid it. And now, for the first time, every piece of it was being laid out in one place. Every transfer. Every gap, every decision. I gathered my notes, sliding them back into the folder. When is the hearing? I asked. Next week, Rachel said. We'll present everything then. I stood, feeling the weight of it, not overwhelming but grounded. Because this wasn't about uncovering something uncertain anymore. It was about showing something real. And once it was shown, there wouldn't be any room left for interpretation. Just the truth, and whatever came after it. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. Not silent, but controlled. The kind of quiet that comes from people choosing their words carefully because everything is being recorded, weighed, remembered. Marcus was already there when I walked in. He didn't look at me right away. He was sitting beside his attorney, reviewing a set of documents with the same focused expression I remembered from years ago when things mattered to him in a way that went beyond appearances. For a moment it felt familiar. Then I sat down beside Rachel, and that feeling disappeared. Because this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a record. The judge entered, and the room shifted instantly. Everyone stood, then sat again once she signaled. Counsel, she said, looking first to Marcus's attorney. You may proceed. They went first. I expected that. Marcus's attorney stood confident but measured and began laying out their argument. Your Honor, this case concerns the management of a minors' trust fund under a discretionary trustee framework. Mr. Reed acted within his authority to make strategic reallocations intended to benefit the long-term value of the trust. Strategic reallocations. I almost smiled at how consistent the language was. They presented charts, clean, simplified versions of the data, highlighting the inflows, the partial returns, the periods where the balance increased. They weren't lying. They were just selecting. While there were temporary transfers, the attorney continued, those funds were used in a manner consistent with investment discretion. Mr. Reed maintained full intent to restore and grow the trust before the beneficiary required access. Intent. Always intent. The judge listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at the documents in front of her. Then she turned to Rachel. "Your response." Rachel stood. She didn't start with emotion. She didn't challenge their language directly. She started with the timeline. "Your Honor, we agree that intent is central to this case," she said, "which is precisely why the full transaction history matters." She approached the bench, handing over a set of organized exhibits. These records show a consistent pattern over multiple years. Funds leaving the trust account moving through Mr. Reed's business and returning only partially, if at all. The judge nodded once, scanning the first page. Rachel continued. "We're not disputing that some funds were returned. We're showing that the structure of these transactions prioritized Mr. Reed's financial needs over the preservation of the trust. That was the shift, not what happened. Why?" She walked through the first example. Clear, step by step. Trust. Business. Partial return. Then the next, and the next. Each one building on the last until the pattern was no longer something you had to interpret. It was something you could see. Marcus's attorney stood to object, once arguing that the interpretation was speculative, but the judge allowed it to continue. "Proceed," she said. "I want to understand the full context." Rachel nodded, then turned to the next exhibit. "This transaction," she said, "is where the pattern changes." She pointed to the $50,000 withdrawal, then to the $40,000 debt payment. "These funds were not reinvested," she said. "They were used to settle a business liability directly tied to Mr. Reed." The room didn't react, but the air shifted, subtle, immediate. Marcus's attorney stepped forward. "Your Honor, that characterization ignores the broader financial context. It addresses the specific use of funds," the judge replied, her tone calm but firm. "Continue." Rachel didn't rush. She let the moment settle before moving on. "This is not an isolated instance," she said. "It's part of a broader pattern of self-benefiting use. Funds were moved in ways that exposed the trust to risk without corresponding benefit to the beneficiary." Then she stepped back slightly. "We would like to call Dr. Aaron Lewis." The forensic accountant took the stand, sworn in, and began explaining the flow of money. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just clearly. He used the same language he had in Rachel's office. Cycling of funds, partial restoration, unbalanced flow, and then self-benefiting use. Marcus's attorney cross-examined him, tried to reframe the movements as strategic, tried to emphasize the returns that had occurred, tried to bring it back to intent. But every time they did, Dr. Lewis returned to the same point. "Intent does not negate the structure of the transactions," he said. "And the structure shows repeated use of trust funds to support external obligations. External, not Lily's, not the trust's." Marcus finally spoke when he was called. He didn't look at me when he took the stand. He looked at the judge. "I never intended to harm my daughter," he said. His voice was steady, believable. "I made decisions under pressure," he continued. "But every decision was made with the goal of ensuring long-term growth. The business needed stability to succeed, and that success would benefit her." The judge listened. "Did you use funds from the trust to support your business operations?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Did you document those transfers as formal loans? Num. Did you ensure full and timely return of those funds?" He hesitated. "Not always." The room went still, not because it was dramatic, but because it was clear. The judge looked down at the documents again, then back at him. "One more question," she said. Marcus nodded. "This payment," she continued, referencing the $40,000 transfer, "was this used to settle a personal or business debt unrelated to the trust?" Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "It was a business obligation," he said. Was it for the direct benefit of the trust? He didn't answer immediately. Then no. That was it. No raised voices, no sudden reactions, just a single word that closed the gap between argument and fact. The judge nodded once. "Thank you," she said. Marcus stepped down. For the first time since the hearing started, he glanced in my direction. Not long. Just enough for me to see something shift in his expression. Not anger, not even regret. Recognition of what this had become. The judge reviewed her notes briefly, then spoke. "I will take this under advisement and issue a ruling shortly," she said. The session ended just like that. People stood. Papers were gathered. Conversations resumed in low voices. But I stayed seated for a moment longer, not because I needed time, but because I wanted to hold on to that clarity. For weeks, everything had been layered language, explanations, assumptions. Now it wasn't. Now it was just numbers, actions, and one answer that couldn't be reframed. No. The ruling came 3 days later. Not in a dramatic courtroom moment. Not with everyone watching. Just a document emailed to Rachel, forwarded to me with a single line, "It's in your favor. Call me when you've read it." I opened it at my kitchen table, the same place where I had first spread out those statements weeks earlier. The language was formal, precise, unemotional, but every sentence carried weight. The court found that Marcus had breached his fiduciary duty as trustee, not because he had moved funds, but because of how and why he had done it. The ruling made that distinction clear. While discretionary authority allows for certain reallocations, it stated the repeated use of trust funds to support external financial obligations without proper documentation and without full restoration constitutes a violation of the trustee's duty to act solely in the beneficiary's best interest. I read that sentence twice, not for understanding, for confirmation. It wasn't about misunderstanding investment strategy. It wasn't about timing. It was about boundaries, and he had crossed them. The order was direct. Marcus was required to repay the full amount withdrawn from the trust, adjusted for the portions that had not been returned, plus financial penalties tied to the misuse. He was removed as trustee effective immediately. An independent financial institution would take over management of the account with full reporting requirements moving forward. No more discretion. No more control. I sat there for a long moment after finishing the document, my hands resting lightly on the table. I didn't feel victorious. I felt settled, like something that had been uncertain for too long had finally taken a fixed shape. My phone rang. "Rachel." "I'm guessing you've read it," she said. "I have." "How do you feel?" I thought about that for a second. "Clear," I said. She let out a small breath on the other end. "That's usually a good sign," she replied. "They've been given a repayment structure, timeline, amounts, everything defined. If he doesn't comply, enforcement escalates quickly." "I understand." "There's one more thing," she added. "You have the option to pursue additional claims, damages, extended penalties." "I'm not going to," I said. She paused. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Can I ask why?" I looked across the room where Lily's backpack was leaning against the chair, half-zipped, one of her notebooks sticking out at an angle. "Because I'm not trying to win more," I said. "I'm trying to end this." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That makes sense," and left it there. After the call, I printed the ruling and placed it in a folder, not to revisit, just to have it. That evening, Lily came home from school, dropping her bag in the usual spot. "Mom," she called from the hallway. "Are you busy?" "No," I said, stepping out of the kitchen. "What's up?" She walked in holding a permission slip for a field trip. "Can you sign this?" she asked. "Of course." I took it from her, scanning the details automatically. Then she looked up at me, her expression more serious than usual. "Did everything get fixed?" she asked. I knew what she meant. Kids don't always understand the details, but they feel when something shifts. I crouched down slightly so we were at eye level. "Yes," I said. "Is my money safe now?" The question was simple, direct. And for the first time since this started, I didn't have to think about the answer. "Yes," I said again. "It is." She nodded, satisfied with that, and moved on, already talking about something else, something small and immediate and completely separate from everything that had just happened. I watched her for a moment, then stood up, the permission slip still in my hand. That was the point of all of this. Not the court, not the ruling, not even the money. Just that. A clear answer to a simple question. Later that week, Marcus reached out. Not about the case, not about the ruling, just a short message. "I understand." Nothing else. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because there wasn't anything left to say that would change what had already been defined. Boundaries don't need explanation once they're set. They just need to be held. A month later, the new trustee sent the first official report. Detailed. Transparent. Every movement accounted for. I read through it once, then filed it away. Not because I didn't care, but because I no longer needed to check for what was missing. That part was over. What remained was quieter, more stable. Not perfect, but real. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. I didn't tell this story because everything worked out cleanly. It didn't. Trust doesn't break in a single moment, and it doesn't rebuild just because a court says it should. What I learned is that boundaries aren't about punishment. They're about clarity, about knowing where responsibility ends and where protection begins. If you've ever been told to just trust the process while something didn't feel right, you're not wrong for asking questions. And you're not wrong for wanting proof. Forgiveness is a choice, but access is a boundary. You can let go of anger without giving someone the same control they had before. If this story resonates with you, I'd really like to hear your perspective. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And if you've ever had to draw a line with someone you once trusted, what did that look like for you? This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.